My wife and I had recently settled into a cozy beach cottage along the rugged coastline of the Pacific Northwest. The place had yellow shutters and led right out to sandy dunes stretching down to the ocean. Around us were other cottages, each with those same yellow shutters, like a little coastal community tradition. I worked from home, and my wife, Alice, was a painter, so we figured it was the perfect time to leave the hustle of the city and settle into the quiet, small-town life. It felt like the kind of place where we could slow down, take things in, and let the scenery inspire us. For our first early morning walk with our dog, Barry, we headed out along the shore. The air was misty, and gentle waves rolled up onto the beach. It was miles away from the feel of a crowded city park. We passed a few other dog walkers who were weaving in and out of the surf, and one thing struck me: they were all barefoot. Curious, I slipped off my own shoes and socks, wanting to feel the cool sand under my feet. But as soon as my toes hit the wet sand, I felt an icy shock. A wave splashed over my feet, and I couldn't help but wince. The water was freezing. Alice looked over, a bit concerned. "You okay?" she asked. I gave her a tight-lipped smile. "Just a bit colder than I expected," I replied, hoping to sound casual. We kept walking along the shore, passing more locals who were just as barefoot as the others, while I tried to ignore the numbing cold creeping up my legs. How were they handling it so easily? Alice kept glancing at me, probably noticing my discomfort. "Are you sure you're all right?" she asked again, sensing my tension. I forced a quick smile, saying, "How about we check out the town instead?" Once I'd gotten my shoes and socks back on, we wandered off to explore the little coastal town. It was quaint, with just a bait shop, a hardware store, and not much else. The chill was still biting at my legs, though, so I suggested, maybe we should grab a warm drink. "Where?" Alice replied, glancing around. After a few minutes of searching without luck, we spotted a middle-aged couple sitting on a bench, gazing out at the ocean like they were in a trance. I gave a friendly smile and asked, "Excuse me, is there a coffee shop nearby?" They stayed fixed on the view, so I added, "We're new in town." Finally, the woman turned to me with a warm smile and pointed down a nearby street. "Helen's tea room is just around the corner." "Thank you," I said, feeling a bit of relief. The man chuckled and added, "That'll help warm up those cold legs of yours." His comment threw me. How did he know my legs were chilled? The tea room was cozy, with antique furniture from the 1800s giving it an old-world charm. Every table was full of locals chatting over tea, but they stopped to watch us as we walked in. Alice and I exchanged a quick look. "We must look like tourists," I joked softly. A mysterious older woman in her late 70s came over to greet us, wrapped in a robe. Alice offered her a polite smile. "Your place is lovely." The woman, Helen, frowned slightly and said, "I'm sorry, we're fully booked." I glanced around and noticed an empty table in the corner. "We just moved here," I said, mentioning that we'd taken one of the beach cottages with the yellow shutters. Helen's expression softened, and she nodded. "Come on, then, let's get those legs warmed up." Helen poured us each a steaming cup of tea with a faint yellow tint. "Our special blend," she said with a wink. Alice asked, "Do you get many tourists around here?" Helen shook her head, explaining, "Most leave when it gets too cold to swim." Then she moved on, offering the tea to another couple. Alice and I shared a look and then sipped our tea under the curious eyes of the locals. The warmth spread through my body, easing the cold in my legs until it melted away. That night, I took a lukewarm shower and climbed into bed beside Alice, who'd already fallen asleep, sprawled across the sheets. The evening was humid, and I cracked open the bedroom window to catch a bit of the ocean breeze. Sometime later, I woke to the sound of Barry barking loudly. It was around 2 in the morning, and he was practically howling by the window. I grabbed a beach stone from outside, my heart pounding as I wondered if someone had wandered onto our property from the beach. My pulse quickened when I saw a light coming from the porch next door. To my surprise, our neighbor, a fit man in his early 40s, was rinsing off in his outdoor shower. I put down the stone and walked over to say hello. The man, still dripping, smiled and wrapped a towel around his waist before extending his hand in greeting. "Name's Jim. I'm guessing you two are our new neighbors." I just blinked at him, still in shock. "Jim, you do know it's 2 in the morning, right?" He shrugged and replied casually, "Perfect time for a dip, don't you think?" He couldn't be talking about the ocean, it had to be nearly 50 degrees out here. Surely, anyone would get hypothermia. But Jim just kept smiling. "You should come along sometime," he added, like it was no big deal. I was at a loss for words. He simply turned back toward his house, leaving a trail of salt water on his skin that almost seemed to sink into his yellowish, sun-weathered shoulders. Back inside, I tossed and turned for hours, too hot and restless. My mind kept racing with the thought, had our strange neighbor really invited us to take a midnight swim in icy water? The next morning, I woke drenched in sweat. Groggy, I shuffled into the living room and spotted Alice on the deck in her nightgown, painting the ocean. I joined her. "How long have you been up?" I asked. "Couldn't sleep. It's so muggy," she replied. She was working on a painting of a yellowish figure out in the water. I stared at it, taken aback. "That's strange," I said, "I actually met one of our neighbors last night. He'd just come in from a swim in the ocean." Alice nodded thoughtfully. "Some people are into cold water swimming," she pointed out. She was right, of course, but something about the encounter still felt off. All day, I couldn't shake the image of Jim and his strange, relaxed demeanor. How wasn't he shivering? And why was his skin the same yellowish color as the figure in Alice's painting? That night, I decided to stay up and see if my neighbor really did go for a swim in that frigid water. But as the hours dragged on, I started nodding off in the deck chair. I awoke to hushed voices drifting over from the beach. Quietly, I crept down to the shore. It was pitch dark except for a soft yellow glow rippling across the water. To my utter amazement, I saw a group of my neighbors swimming and splashing around in the ocean, seemingly unaffected by the cold. Some of them were diving below the surface while others floated on their backs, relaxed and content. Hiding behind a dune, I watched in disbelief. Jim rose out of the water, caught my eye, and gave me a friendly wave to join them. Heart pounding, I sprinted back to the cottage, still hearing their laughter and splashing behind me. I locked every door and drew the shutters tight. Sweat poured down my back as I tried to catch my breath. The whole thing was insane, there was no way I'd ever be able to do what they were doing. I'd freeze. Weeks went by, and Alice and I settled into our routine. We took long beach walks with Barry, letting our feet dip in the surf. There were still a few tourists around, and I found myself wondering when they'd finally leave us to our peaceful solitude. We made regular stops at Helen's tea room and even bought our own supply of the yellow tea she served. Every night, Alice and I went down to the beach and watched our neighbors out in the water, completely at ease. I'd gotten used to the idea of them swimming in the cold ocean, but no matter how much they smiled and waved at us, I wasn't ready to join them. Then, one dark winter night, Alice and I decided to take an ice-cold shower together. Strangely, the freezing water felt almost warm on our skin. When we stepped out, we dried off almost instantly. I glanced in the mirror and noticed a faint yellow glow radiating from beneath our skin. Neither of us could sleep that night, our bodies burning up with heat. Finally, Alice and I exchanged a look and knew exactly what we needed to do. In our swimsuits, hand in hand, we walked through the dunes and joined our neighbors in the sea. They greeted us with smiles, continuing their peaceful swim. The instant the icy water touched my skin, it felt like a balm against the heat raging inside. I felt euphoric as I splashed and swam around, surrounded by the glowing forms of my neighbors. Night after night, we returned to the ocean, finding ourselves drawn deeper into the ritual. It was the best part of our day, the icy water and the sense of belonging were intoxicating, filling every moment of my thoughts. One evening, as we prepared for our swim by sipping Helen's yellow tea on the deck, we noticed a group of young travelers down by the beach, gathered around a campfire. Alice and I exchanged a frown. How dare they ruin our perfect night? As we walked down to the shore, we heard our neighbors arguing with the travelers. Voices rose, and insults flew back and forth. To my shock, our neighbors surrounded the travelers and dragged them into the freezing ocean. Their screams echoed across the beach as they thrashed and fought against the icy water. I ran forward, but by the time I reached them, all had gone silent. The travelers' bodies floated, face down in the waves. I tried to pull them to shore, but the current was too strong. Meanwhile, my neighbors swam and bathed, as if nothing had happened. Back at the house, my wife and I were both frantic. "We have to call the police," Alice pleaded. But I shook my head. What could we even say? It'd be our word against all the neighbors. No one would believe us, not about the nightly swims, not about how we could endure the icy water. They'd just call it a tragic accident with a bunch of drunk tourists. The next morning, we woke up sprawled on the bathroom floor tiles, exhausted and overheated. We couldn't sleep at all, and we'd spent the night taking turns in and out of the cold shower. I stepped outside for air, desperate for some relief, and saw Jim jogging past. He shot me a friendly smile. How could he smile after what happened? Did he even realize what he'd done, killing those people? Alice and I decided we'd take Barry for a long walk to clear our heads. As we strolled, the coastline looked so beautiful, with jagged cliffs and waves crashing against the rocks. For a brief moment, I almost forgot about last night. On the way back, we passed a young family with a little girl, no more than 5. The mother smiled and asked, "Is there anywhere nearby to get ice cream? It's not even summer." I snapped, surprising myself. The parents exchanged a worried look and moved on, while the little girl looked sad. Suddenly, it hit me. I was turning into one of them, just like my neighbors. And that family was in danger. I hurried after them. "You have to leave," I called out. The family just picked up their pace, clearly alarmed. I shouted, "It's not safe for tourists here." That night, we decided to skip our usual swim. How could we go back to the ocean after what we'd seen? We tried to stay in our ice bath instead, but before long, the water started to heat up, bubbling around us. It felt like we were cooking alive. We had no choice, we had to go to the ocean. "Just one quick swim," I told Alice. We rushed down to the beach and waded in, avoiding the neighbors, who were swimming as if nothing had happened, as if the ocean wasn't stained by those travelers' blood. Alice and I moved quickly, diving under and swimming until we felt our skin cool down. Then, as we made our way back to shore, we heard a muffled scream. I turned to see our neighbors dragging that same family, kicking and screaming, from a nearby beach house they'd rented. Horrified, I watched as the neighbors forced the mother and father into the water. I swam toward them, shouting, trying to fight them off, but they held me back. Their eyes were wild, glowing bright yellow, as if they were possessed. The little girl was struggling just to stay afloat, her tiny limbs shivering in the freezing water. I saw the parents go limp, their fight gone. With one last, desperate cry, the mother called out, "Please, save her." Then a huge wave rose up, swallowing the little girl. I dived under, pushing through the darkness until I found her lifeless body drifting toward the seabed. Grabbing her arm, I pulled her to shore. Alice and I carried her back to the house, leaving the neighbors behind, still swimming, still smiling. Once inside, we laid the girl on the couch. She was blue, barely breathing, each gasp weaker than the last. I wrapped her in blankets, but she still didn't stir. "We have to call 911. Alice urged. "There's no time," I replied. Then I looked over at the pot of tea on the kitchen counter. Carefully, I poured some of the yellow liquid down her throat. As we watched, a faint yellow glow pulsed through her veins. Moments later, her eyes opened. Despite witnessing our neighbor's ritual killings, we couldn't leave the beach house. We were bound to it now, needing those nightly swims just to survive. The little girl became our daughter. She was too young to remember what had happened, and now that she's older, she even swims in the ocean with her friends. Every day, Alice and I walk Barry along the shore. And whenever we see a new tourist, we warn them to leave.